Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Dan Wright is co-hosting. This is a fully independent podcast. Now more than ever, independent media needs the support of our listeners and viewers. The website aroundtheempire.com has all the information you need to find out how to support it and gain access to bonus content. We had a long and fascinating discussion with Kit Klarenberg about his recent report, Operation Surprise, leaked emails expose secret intelligence coup to install Boris Johnson. And the recent developments with Boris Johnson make this even more interesting. And we also talked about his latest report, leaked emails expose UK Home Secretary Priti Patel's connection with MI-style research and influence operation. Also particularly important topic right now because of the situation with Julian Assange and Priti Patel's power over his extradition. We also talked about the parallels in American and global politics, about Julian Assange, and a variety of other subjects. Quick note, this interview was recorded a few weeks ago. Major apologies for it taking so long to produce and publish, and for the recent gap in publishing podcasts in general. It's health issues again, and recovery time from procedures derailed me much longer than anticipated. But you should now expect the podcast to flow again, and with some extras to make up for lost time. And this episode is the full interview, including the bonus segment. Kit Klarenberg is an investigative journalist who explores the role of intelligence services in shaping politics and perceptions, and he's been published by numerous media outlets, including The Gray Zone, Cradle, Electronic Intifada, RT, Minpress News, and more. Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm Joanne Leon, co-hosting with co-founder of the podcast, Dan Wright, and we are really excited to talk to Kit Klarenberg today. Kit's speaking to us from Europe. Hello, Kit. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. It's great to talk to you.
My pleasure.
So,
hey, Dan.
Kit has a big bombshell article that most people have probably already heard about, and the Gray Zone. And the title of it is Operation Surprise, leaked emails expose secret intelligence coup to install Boris Johnson, and then also a slogan, a very British Brexit coup. And I noticed that Craig Murray chimed in here, Kit, and said that this reporting of once in a generation importance about the British state. This is reporting of once in a generation importance about the British state. While you were being misdirected by I don't know if I can pronounce her name, Cadwallader,
Yes.
and company, into an entirely unevidenced allegation that Russian intelligence were behind Brexit, it was actually MI6. So it gives away a little bit of the plot. But my point for bringing it up is that Craig sees it as possibly a once in a generation type revelation. And Kit, before we started recording, was talking about how it has generated interest from, some unusual new friends who aren't normally friends, people who aren't usually interested, and he'll tell us more about that. So Kit, do you want me to go through the main points, or I think we should probably just let you go on.
Happy to leap in at the deep end.
Okay.
But yeah, this is an incredibly. I'll try and keep this as accessible as possible, particularly to your US-based listeners who may not know about these kind of events and individuals.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
I would say that yes, that in terms of the trove that Grey Zone managed to that was passed to us anonymously, it is a kind of a very, very, I mean, entirely unprecedented actually insight into how power really works in Britain, and all of these unaccountable, unelected, and indeed largely unknown figures. They don't who the average citizen would be completely unaware of. The enormous clout they hold over policy and politicians, and indeed just the thrust of politics in Britain. And yeah, essentially, it's a very colourful cast of characters. It seems to be, I call them the cabal because the dictionary definition of the cabal is a secret political sect, and I mean that's very much very apposite description. I mean, this is yes a shadowy nexus of people who were coordinating in secret, conducting secret operations to influence influence events, influence public figures, and essentially. It's led by this guy called Gwydion Prince, who is a kind of a long-standing member of Britain's elite defense establishment. One name that might be more familiar to your US listeners is Richard Dearlove.
Yes, definitely. Whenever his name comes up, it's bad news.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he was the head of MI6 and ended up leaving because he played a prominent role in the kind of the fabrication and dissemination of false intelligence related to Iraq's non-existent weapons of mass destruction, which was absolutely pivotal into getting the public and the military behind going to war, which was illegal and immoral in the absolute extreme. He is obviously, he crops up in Russiagate as well. There in some of these emails refer to his cooperation with Attorney General Durham, which is absolutely fascinating. But essentially, they were backed by a number of shadowy, reclusive, often aristocratic billionaires who have no web footprint. They're completely hidden from public view. And what they sought to do was, and to give you a bit of context here, this is the document trail starts in August 2018, when there's a file created by Prince called Operation Surprise, and it spells out their kind of bold, malicious objectives in really stark detail. I mean, extraordinary detail. It's stuff that you would never see in black and white typically, and so they effectively were trying to block Theresa May's Brexit deal, which had just been announced, to ensure a kind of a hard Brexit, so i.e. leaving without any deal in place, and in any regard, with and effectively ending outright the relationship of between Britain and the EU in every way, and in every regard. And then they also proposed removing Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time, from power, and replacing her with a Prime Minister, quote unquote, fit for purpose, and also cleansing the quote unquote polluted civil service, i.e., just purging it of people with pro-EU, pro-Remain sympathies. And so it seems to have started moving very, very quickly, and they were getting kind of unaccountable income sent to their wives' bank accounts, so presumably so it wouldn't crop up on on their own tax returns. And the context for this is that yes, this withdrawal deal was what Theresa May originally agreed with her own ministers, and indeed with the European Union, was based on the principle of what was called managed divergence. So it was effectively EU membership by other means. It was effectively, Britain would effectively remain to the cabal's eyes, subordinate economically, politically, and this is the key thing here, militarily. So they opposed any arrangement that would keep London tethered to Brussels defence structures and obligations. I mean, there is it's probably many decades away, and I don't think it would ever actually work. But I mean, the EU is moving to create a European army and a kind of pan-European intelligence service. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, their view was this would, undermine the relationship between Britain and America. In particular, the Five Eyes global spying network, which is, that is a relic of World War II intelligence sharing by the British and American intelligence services, and was formalized in 1947 by what they called the UK-USA agreement. Which, I mean, and at that point, that was drawn up at a time when Britain and America were, I mean, at least, operating under the illusion that they were equal powers, that Britain, with its empire and Commonwealth as it still existed at that time, was, comparable to the political, geographic, and economic and military might of the US. And of course, this is not the case anymore. Britain is significantly less powerful than the US in almost every conceivable regard now. But this archaic agreement allows the UK to reap. I mean, the Five Eyes spying network, it kind of vacuums up phone calls, data, emails, text messages, all electronic communications across the globe through a variety of means. And by remaining kind of at the head of this Five Eyes alliance, Britain is in a position to receive privileged information it would not if it was, say, Australia or New Zealand or Canada. So they wanted to maintain this, and they thought that this was very much under threat by remaining in any way subject to EU defence directives or structures. And so how the cabal wanted to go around achieving this, and kind of torpedoing the deal, and potentially sabotaging Theresa May's premiership in the process, was an influence campaign targeting kind of prominent pro-Remain groups that were getting very loud at that time. They were demanding a second referendum, or that just Britain just stay in entirely, and they also mooted in what was referred to as an intelligence operation. Now, this intelligence operation, there are a number of different proposals for how this would go forward. For instance, and this was, of course, Dearlove's sinister input, was that they first wanted to potentially try and infiltrate and spy on and dig up dirt on the civil service and other. And indeed, campaign groups, and this, I'm fairly sure this would be illegal, or at least, I mean, it's obviously highly unethical, and indeed, the British government would be extremely, angry that kind of a private citizen or private kind of nexus of citizens was trying to do this. The UK civil service is an effectively, anonymous, permanent bureaucracy. It has its detractors, it has its supporters. I mean, you're pushing an open door with me to say that the machinery of government is, leaden and slow, and there are far too many bureaucrats, with their noses in the trough. But that's by the by. I mean, this is still, a highly dubious proposal, and it was one that Dearlove was only too willing to explore with former MI6 and former CIA colleagues. So, for instance, he proposed using having some quote former CIA colleagues set up a fake Democratic Party operation to approach the Remainers from across the seas and penetrate them. And they were apparently highly expert at this sort of espionage. So I mean, this is these emails are full of very revealing little nuggets and excerpts, which are really just, again, this incredibly candid insight into how the military intelligence and security services work, and their kind of total lack of scruples. Can I
interrupt you here for just a second, and to just to dig in a little bit more on the factional aspect of this before we get into the material? So we have Theresa May. And Theresa May is somewhat, we have to remember too, this is all happening around the same time as the 2016 election, right?
No, no,
Talking,
this is after. This is after.
oh,
This is
after, all right, because there was the Obama side of the establishment, which is very much aligned with at least some faction of the intelligence establishment over here, and they were Obama was campaigning for Remain, right?
yes, yes, indeed,
And then
indeed.
Trump was aligning with the Leavers, and it seemed to me like more with the British um, establishment, the old school links that you described. And now you're talking about the CIA aspect of it. Are there any names we can tie to this to get a better sense of who we're talking about on this side of the pond?
Well, they're not. Irritatingly, there are very few kind of names of specific individuals. Although, I mean, what's pretty extraordinary is that that Henry Kissinger approached. Richard Dearlove approached Henry Kissinger. He specifically did so via, I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly, her name Jami Mishik, Jamimiscik. She's the chief executive of Kissinger Associates. She's also served in the CIA at the kind of highest levels for 20 plus years. Then went into the private sector as these people quite clearly do. And so the hope was that Kissinger would effectively almost reinforce, reinforce this notion of that the special relationship was sacred and that it was under threat by the EU. I mean, I think that it's in terms of factionalism. I'm rather reminded of Carl Oglesby, who coined the notion of the kind of the Yankee Cowboy War in the US, where it's you have the liberal East Coast kind of Anglophile elite, and then you have the kind of Texan oil baron elite. I mean, I don't necessarily put it in such kind of blunt geographic terms, but I mean there is definitely a huge split between kind of national and international capital. You could break it down that way. I mean, in the UK, you have this old guard, which is has this very romantic and probably very delusional view of Britain as this kind of grand power, like kind of harking back to the glory days of empire, which are long gone and never returning. And they very much hoped and thought that Brexit would deliver this. And then on the other hand, you have the more kind of liberal, internationally minded, typically younger wing of the establishment too. I mean, I don't actually care for either of these either of these groups particularly. I mean, I think that I mean, just from a personal perspective, I thought that before, during, and after the referendum, the Remain side behaved like a bunch of like cooler than thou, holier than thou teenagers who were kind of viewed anyone who wasn't completely on board with the European project as somehow an ignoramus and racist, which is just not the case. And I think that it is that that kind of highly polarized, fractious nature of debate. I mean, it's the same with Trump in the US, where effectively an enormous number of people voted for Trump for a variety of reasons, and indeed in the second in the 2020 election, his vote went up across every demographic, irrespective of skin color or income and whatnot. And it's like that speaks to an appeal to his ideas, which cuts beyond this kind of populism or whatnot.
Right. Yeah. I think populism, or the kindest way to describe it would be, a populism or a desire to act in the nation's best interest.
Well, it's I mean, I think that, as again, just from a personal perspective, I think nationalism obviously has some very has some dubious connotations for many, and that's understandable. But I mean, I think that the notion that states should have sovereignty and that they have a right to govern in their own interests and elect those who think best represent those interests. I mean, I think that's pretty inalienable, and it actually we see globalization collapsing, like under the weight of its own contradictions due to the war in Ukraine. I mean, all of these sanctions and like all of these predictions of total apocalypse and collapse in Russia, because they can't go to McDonald's or like use the Apple Store. I mean, in reality, Russia is a fully energy and food self-sufficient country.
Right.
If it's cut off from certain imports, it doesn't matter. And actually, it's the countries that have kind of outsourced, their production of all of these things that are in the most trouble. I mean, where I am right now in Europe has a history which may persist to this day of self-sufficiency, and I mean, my energy bills are virtually non-existent. Food's extremely cheap and of exceptionally high quality. I mean, it's funny as well because there are a couple of restaurants here which are American, kind of American themed, serving American food, and they have their Google reviews are full of Americans praising the quality and saying it's like the food at home but better. And it's like, yes, because it's like there's no processing. It's not pumped full of salt and sugar and that sort of thing. But anyway, we're kind of drifting away from the point.
Yeah.
Something real quick. Because you're talking about factionalism, and what I remember seeing, at least, and we didn't obviously know about this subterranean stuff going on.
Yes.
From an outsider's perspective, is I saw the old establishment, or I guess the old new establishment, right? The Blairites, Tony Blair in particular, constantly campaigning and using logic completely different than what you've exposed here with Dearlove. Dearlove is saying we're going to, Russia and these foreign powers want us to stay in the EU and be weak, and we need to be strong. And Tony Blair was making a very explicit case that actually Europe, if the UK is not part of Europe, then that's not how power works. I think that's actually a verbatim quote. Power works when we're all united, and if we leave Europe, we're going to be irrelevant. So can you talk a little bit about a sort of, I guess, is this a neoliberal versus reactionary? It's not clear, but that was the Blairite line, and it seemed to be with the Remain people. They were saying, yes, maybe EU has problems, but we're a small country. We need to be powerful. And certainly Tony Blair was no stranger to serving the United States. So I guess I'm just a little confused about this intra.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But this is what's interesting is that one of the key reasons that the UK ended up in the EU in the first place was because of American pressure, because it would, and this is one of the reasons that de Gaulle blocked British membership of what was the European Community at the time repeatedly, because he felt that it would be an American Trojan horse that would guide and manipulate the progress and development of the European Union according to American interests. But again, I think in general, you're confused. I think elites are generally confused as well, and I think they end up buying into. Romantic narratives and beliefs which are not particularly true. I mean, there is quite clearly Britain, if it's in a position where it does not have control of its own legislation and borders, and is part of a borderless in supranational body, is not stronger, is it? And it's like, and funnily enough, by token of leaving, and then the pound falling in value, and then thus the cost of living and indeed imports increasing massively, that's a clear demonstration of the danger of being in a kind of mutually dependent faction. It's the second that is exposed to any kind of shock, then you see its weakness. But then likewise, you have these people who are were utterly convinced that the EU is this collapsing entity, and that we're much stronger outside it, and indeed that we're going to be able to effectively reconstruct and regain British greatness and strength on the world stage. I mean, I'm not actually seen any indication of that since, although I mean the Ukraine crisis seems to be changing things. So I mean, yeah, it's very interesting as well that yes, the kind of the international aspects of this, because yes, you have Obama, who was obviously very much kind of gave that speech where he very, very inconspicuously used the phrase Britain will be at the back of the queue, which is, a very British way of saying things, which I don't think he otherwise would have said. I think he would have said line if he was talking about, to a US.
Tested.
Yeah. But yeah. So essentially, I think that was, Obama is a globalist and and a kind of quote unquote international nationalist. So that was probably his reasoning. I mean, I think that the kind of Trump's view of the kind of U.S. international relations was actually significantly more nuanced than many people, indeed, the overwhelming majority of people gave credit for. And yes, I mean it was a bunch of sovereign democracies trading with one another and cooperating and achieving some kind of harmony that way, which is actually, a kind of Victorian idea that was destroyed by the First World, era idea that was destroyed by the First World War, and indeed the Second, which created a kind of
right. So this is like a very serious throwback. If they're sort of saying, we're going to, I guess, make the UK great again, but without the empire. I mean, I thought the UK empire was reduced to sort of money laundering for the city of London, and kind of had lost its certainly kinetic ability. I also have to say, just total side note, if Joanne has a more substantive question, but when I heard this attack on the civil service, I had to think of Yes Minister, that TV show.
Oh God, yeah, but it's just,
I
think I know people who work in the civil service, and they rarely admit it, and they're not particularly happy when they do. But I mean, it is terrifyingly accurate.
Yeah, and there's that scene where Sir Humphrey Appleby, to go to your point, goes, well, we had to be part of the EU, so we can make a big pig's breakfast out of it. That's the whole point.
Just let the Foreign Office realise what damage this will do to the European idea.
Well, I'm sure they do. That's why they support it.
Well, surely the Foreign Office is pro-Europe, isn't it?
Yes and no. If you'll forgive the expression. The Foreign Office is pro-Europe because it is really anti-Europe. The civil service was united in its desire to make sure that the common market didn't work. That's why we went into it.
What are you talking about?
Minister, Britain has had the same foreign policy objective for at least the last 500 years, to create a disunited Europe. In that cause, we have fought with the Dutch against the Spanish, with the Germans against the French, with the French and Italians against the Germans, and with the French against the Germans and Italians. Divide and rule, you see. Why should we change now, when it's worked so well?
That's all ancient history, surely.
Yes, and current policy. We had to break the whole thing up, so we had to get inside. We tried to break it up from the outside, but that wouldn't work. Now that we're inside, we can make a complete pig's breakfast of the whole thing. Set the Germans against the French against the Italians against the Dutch. The Foreign Office is terribly pleased. It's just like old times.
Surely we're all committed to the European ideal.
Really, Minister?
If not, why are we pressing for an increase in the membership?
Well, for the same reason. It's just like the United Nations, in fact. The more members it has, the more arguments it can stir up, the more futile and impotent it becomes.
What appalling cynicism.
Yes. We call it diplomacy, Minister.
Oh my gosh. Well, while we're on this topic of the factional and motives and things, can we talk a little bit? I know you can't talk, or you don't really have that much information about the origin of the documents, but I mean, you've been the recipient of a number of leaked documents, so I think you have a pretty good sense of why and where in general this may have come from. First of all, you obviously went through some authenticity checking, and you feel confident having a lot of, like I said, experience with leaked documents. But do you have any sense of the motivation of the entity that leaked this document, or do you have anything more to say on the origins? Did they come to you, or did they come to Gray Zone, or?
Well, yeah, no, they were passed anonymously to Gray Zone. I mean, I think that we can speculate about whether there's a particular agenda in it being in kind of released now. I mean, actually, I think that really that these are a bunch of people who are not very technologically savvy or literate. I mean, there's this one, there's several emails where they talk about how WhatsApp is unbreakable. As we well know, it isn't on a startling scale. But it's, yes, I mean, this is a bunch of people who thought that they could literally say anything and it would never be read or intercepted. I mean, in that context, could they have fallen for a very basic phishing scam? Could they have told the wrong person or given the wrong person access to their computers? I mean, quite plausibly, really. I mean, I think that what's really interesting is there's their mole. They have this mole in the civil service who was passing them sensitive information and documents from behind the scenes, which is a very serious crime, which she could end up in prison for under the Official Secrets Act. But she would frequently ask for the metadata of documents she provided to the cabal to be removed. So that shows that she is slightly more technologically literate than the others, and it probably helps that she's ever so slightly younger. This is like a fingerprint. So it's in the case of a Word document, it would be it would show the user who created it and when it was created. In the case of the emails, you have an enormous, EML files are small, but they have an enormous amount of raw data which show when it was sent, when it was received, how it was sent, the passage it took, and all sorts of code and other things. And that would be very, very, very difficult to forge, particularly if it's there are some emails where they converse with someone at a private company, and that the data of those emails to and from this individual at a private company stacks up. That would be incredibly difficult to forge, even in a basic kind of 2, 3, 4 email chain. And it's particularly a chain in which, it contains all sorts of other information like their phone numbers or maybe documents, which, yes, like the metadata stacks up. So to do this on the scale of the kind of, tens of thousands of emails that we receive, it would be absolutely impossible. It would take, a vast team of the world's finest, forgers, most technically gifted forgers, probably years actually to do all this. And I mean, just principle of Occam's razor, at the very least, it just seems a lot more likely that they are authentic. I mean, since I started messaging people who are part of asking questions of people who are named in these files, I've had numerous attempted break-ins to my Proton, which I don't think is a coincidence. And I think that there's been some other oddity with other members of the Grey Zone team in terms of their in terms of their operational security, but nothing too serious, nothing that I'm concerned about. And because I think that as well, I've spoken to someone who's named as a target in one of the files, and in some of the emails, and they have indicated to me that they were told at the time by a whistleblower who was kind of connected in some way to this group that this was happening. So I mean, that's some pretty strong confirmation that we're on the right track here. And I think that particularly as the emails go up to almost a few weeks ago, so, and they have lots of easily verifiable, easily verifiable information in them, and discussion about contemporary events. And they show that yes, that this group, which very much took credit for getting rid of Theresa May and patted itself on the back for making her withdrawal agreement quote unquote go belly up with all of their kind of insidious scheming. They now have a direct line to a variety of ministers within the British government, and are seeking to affect and influence government policy to this day. They are taking it. There'll be more on this to come, but I will say that they're taking an extremely keen interest in Ukraine.
Isn't the pervasiveness of this, at least the security state in the UK, at least made me think, and you would know much better than me, that this could be a leak from a faction within GCHQ or someone else who's been intercepting all the emails, and just they could have leaked it. I mean, it looks like to me, from my read on the outside, and please correct me, is that Leave and Remain is not just a civil battle or a fraction within the UK itself, it's within the intelligence elite. And so So maybe
Oh, yeah.
perhaps people who saw this, who are, along came a spider, someone who's watching this electronic communication
Mm.
is looking to pass it somewhere, and they say, well, who would publish it without getting, who would just go at it full hard? And I say, oh, gray zone, because they're being
Yeah, yeah,
labeled as
yeah. Well,
propagandists anyway. Why not give it to them?
yeah, well, it's funny that you say that, because it's like that. I think that I mean, when I was going over a lot of the emails that Dearlove had sent people, I was just like, well, I mean, I would imagine that all of it, because he has emails with people who are part of Mossad and part of Japanese intelligence. So quite clearly, remains an influential figure. All of his associates are probably just going to burn him, like throw him under a bus, because he's, I mean, A, getting exposed like this is just, very poor form. But that B, he's amazingly revealing. And there's a great, I mean, this is very kind of, again, opposite given what you just said. There's a discussion that he had with Prince over whether they could start contacting Boris Boris Johnson directly and trying to influence him on various issues. And they have his mobile number. And Richard Dearlove states, and this is a direct quote, we need to be careful, because when a prime minister comes into office, his communications are given a complete going over by GCHQ, brackets, and do remember, we ourselves listen to the personal communications of quite a few friendly leaders. So, it would be entirely unsurprising if people within the power structure, particularly, like GCHQ, which is, I mean, I know someone who used to work for GCHQ, and he could pretty much confirm that no app or messaging services is actually safe when it comes down to it. If they really want to get in, they'll get in. And it's like, it would be entirely unsurprising to me if this kind of came to someone's attention, and they were like, right, well, we need to stop this, because they're out of control. And they are, like, they genuinely, having worked tirelessly in all these kind of diabolical ways to get rid of Theresa May, now they've now gotten bored of Boris and are looking to see who his replacement is, and how they can affect that.
They're off the reservation, right? I mean, they're running their own foreign policy and domestic policy. So someone who's in the security state, the national security state, is looking at this traffic and looking at these communications and going, okay, this is unacceptable. This, these people are off the reservation.
Well, I think as well, it's a classic. It's a very, I mean, if this is the case, I mean, I think more generally that this is why we think that this story will get quite a lot more traction. And yes, it has already seemed to have kind of surpassed our traditional audience, including people who are usually very critical of us. I would say completely unfairly, but that's just me. Effectively these people were going after other powerful people, and it's like, this is what happened in Watergate, right? So it's like, Nixon was guilty of all manner of sins, but as long as he was targeting foreign countries, or indeed US citizens, it didn't matter. It's like, once it's like, actually you're targeting the Democrats, then that's serious, and you're going to be in serious trouble. You're going to be in real trouble for it. So
right, we know it was another faction, right? Because it was CIA people who did the break-ins. They were the burglars. And it was the FBI. We now know Mark Felt, the deputy, was the source for the Washington Post. So it was literally an intra-elite intelligence battle between the FBI and the CIA. Literally.
Oh yeah. Well, it's, I mean, again, this is it. I mean, this is a really interesting comparison to make as well. Is that that what Nixon didn't trust the CIA, and was specifically, like the plumbers was effectively meant to be like a shadow, dirty tricks and intelligence gathering, unit that was run purely from the White House with trusted people. The CIA was, to say the least, not very happy about this. So then you have Howard Hunt start recruiting Cubans before the plumbers, before the plumbers unit was formally launched, and before he had a job with the White House, in order to kind of infiltrate and then take down that operation. And of course he ended up getting caught and jailed, but it was a CIA operation tripping on its own shoelaces to an extent. But I mean I think that that more generally, the I think that the country and indeed British elites remain utterly split on the question of Britain's relationship with Europe. And it's like, it's interesting. It's the public which are being effectively used and manipulated to one way or another to achieve a particular result, and then they're suffering the consequences, as is so often the case.
And they just one more point I want to touch on before we dig more into the details of your article. I had mentioned the Craig Murray tweet where he says, while you were being misdirected by Kedwaller and company into an entirely unevidenced allegation that Russian intelligence were behind Brexit, ... So it was actually MI6. So I didn't provide any background on that. And I think that people in the US may not have been aware of that whole, there was a pretty, I think in Britain, a pretty big effort to bring around what was, I guess, essentially a conspiracy theory. Maybe you could even say sort of tied to Russiagate, saying that, the Russians were pushing Brexit. That was Carol Cadwallader and the other guy,
Peter Jukes.
Yeah, Peter Jukes.
Yeah, no, he's a real piece of work. I think that, to be charitable to Carol, I think that she is someone who's not very intelligent, who has been used to push a particular narrative. I think that I've got something to come on this, but I think that effectively what happened was, a large number of liberals wanted an excuse and an explanation for why something they didn't want to happen happened, and something they thought wouldn't happen happened. And this is the case in the 2016 US presidential election as well. And so you hit on, it's not because loads of people are angry with established leaders and established parties and they want something different, or they've been ignored and they're maligned and they actually are kind of penalized by the economic system and whatnot, and jobs have been destroyed and communities have been destroyed by outsourcing and privatization. No, what the reality, it's because of some Russian bots. Now, what's interesting is that the famed Internet Research Agency, which is most of its output wasn't even actually seen by anyone.
Buff Bernie, man, Buff Bernie.
Yeah, it was like Buff Bernie memes, and then it's just like they threw it. The Clinton spends tens of millions on Facebook advertising, but no, it was like some Buff Bernie memes and if you like Jesus, if you're a Christian, what I mean? Just just completely ludicrous. And it's like in the UK, there's a clear parallel here. Is that the vast bulk of the Internet Research Agency's alleged activity in the US presidential election was after the election happened. And it's the same in Brexit. There was this much vaunted study which states that there were hundreds of thousands of pro-leave messages posted, and people will reflexively point to this as proof that the Russians swayed the Brexit vote. And yet again, this was all after the vote had actually happened. So, and I think that also as well tied up in this is effectively, I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with Cambridge Analytica, but this is again, this was a British political kind of campaigning firm that was, they're an unethical, dubious company. There's no doubt about that, and they were engaged in all sorts of dirty tricks. But they did, questions abound as to whether they had any involvement in the Brexit campaign. Questions abound to the extent to which they were involved in Trump's campaign. Trump's people claim that because they were useless, they stopped using them long before the vote actually happened. But essentially this was this was, in the words of a former employee, kind of MI6 for hire. They would go to foreign countries and they would meddle in elections or political campaigns, and engage in all sorts of black bag work that MI6 couldn't be directly involved in or kind of implicated in if they got caught. But when this story broke, Cadwaller's initial kind of reports on this kind of very much reflected this reality that it was an established part of Britain's defense, kind of private military and intelligence establishment, that it was run by people with close close ties to the security services and NATO. But then kind of rather abruptly, she kind of started to change tack and suggest that actually that Cambridge Analytica was a Russian operation, and, on the basis of nothing. Like, there is literally zero proof that this is the case, and enormous amounts of evidence pointing to the fact that this couldn't be the case. Like, they were, all its staff were had high level security clearances, which they wouldn't get if they were much like GCHQ goes over the communications of incoming prime ministers. According to Dearlove, I mean, that these people would be thoroughly vetted if there was the slightest indication that any of them were in any way tied to a Russian entity. They would, they wouldn't have those clearances. They wouldn't, enjoy that level of access. I have had friends who have been turned down for government jobs because they're friends with me. Because but anyway, the point is that I think, I mean, this is it's purely speculation, but I think it's very striking, and there needs to hopefully going to be have something out on this quite soon. Was that Carol Codwalla was connected to Integrity Initiative, which your listeners will, from previous episodes of where we've spoken, will be familiar that this was a secret Foreign Office unit that was set up to effectively perpetuate negative fake news about Russia and kind of damage and discredit anti-war figures or or effectively anyone the British state took a disliking to. So they published false information about Julian Assange, which led to his internet connection in the Ecuadorian embassy being cut off. It was just completely just false propaganda, black propaganda. But what's really interesting is that Codwalla, it seems very clear, was receiving briefings from Integrity Initiative and spoke at an event it convened. Now, two people who were prominently involved or secretly, but they were kind of heavily involved in Integrity Initiative, were also key Cambridge Analytica staffers. So there was this woman called Gabby Vandenberg, who was part of the Integrity Initiative's Dutch operation, who effectively created a lot of the psychological warfare methodologies that Cambridge Analytica used. There was another guy called Steve Tatham, who's again part of the Integrity Initiative's UK network, who was a key trainer and in information warfare techniques for Cambridge Analytica. Now, if you were involved in both of these organizations at the same time, and your involvement in Cambridge Analytica kind of threatens your career, looks like it's going to mire you in significant, reputationally ruinous controversy. What might you do? You might blame it all on the Russians, mightn't you? Because you might use Integrity Initiative to Cambridge Analytica is a Russian operation to take the heat off yourself. It seems like a very obvious thing to do. I would never ever be in that situation, but because I'm not totally immoral. But like if I was, then that seems like a very, very obvious way of exculpating myself. Because it's quite extraordinary, and yes, that people to this day remain utterly convinced of these things for which there is no evidence, because they want and need it to be true. It needs to be true that that Brexit wasn't the 17.4 million people voting to leave the European Union wasn't because people were just sick of the political establishment and were willing to take a risk because they thought like it might make their lives better in some way. No, it's because of some puerile social media tweets by bots. Yeah, that's the reason. And it's
the same thing happened here, Kit, with Russiagate, right? The Clinton campaign, who Dan and I suspected from day one.
Yep.
In Russiagate, immediately pulled out the Russia card and just started blaming everything on them because they didn't expect Trump to win. They were afraid to be exposed, and there was some really bad stuff that could be exposed, along with the how could she possibly lose? There had to have been somebody rigging it. Same kinds of dynamics.
And remember, Joanne, I was going to say real quick, remember, a Facebook executive, when it comes to Buff Bernie and these ads from the Internet Research Agency or whatever, a Facebook executive on Twitter, when this first started, this narrative started being built that Clinton didn't lose because liberalism's unpopular or neoliberalism
Yeah.
is unpopular, she's unpopular. A Facebook, and they said that's because of these ads, and a Facebook executive came out on Twitter and said, this is ridiculous. Not only did these ads not reflect it, they happened after the election. And Senator Mark Warner, who sits on one of the senator from Virginia, Democrat, flew to Silicon Valley, to Facebook headquarters to browbeat this guy into retracting it, and then held all these intimidating hearings at Congress. And so, and it was what a key leader of Russia. So that's the pressure.
Yeah, no, honestly, no, it's fantastic that you brought that up, because I was aware of this, but it's just it never gets old to me. It's just this. So we had this in the UK too, where it was like there was a much, and Carol Cadwalladr was all over this as well. I mean, it's just really rather shame. She was actually acting as this, awful state propagandist, like hailing we all have all these kind of parliamentary committees, as you have the Senate committees and whatnot, and we have this parliamentary committee on digital culture, media and sport, and they had this fake news hearing, and it was they heard an enormous amount of false evidence from people connected to Integrity Initiative and all these kind of state propagandists who are talking up about the unique dangers of RT and Sputnik, and then they hold Facebook bosses in front of them and said, we want all of the evidence of information research agency activity on around Brexit on your network. And they said, right, well, we've looked as hard as we can, and the best we can work out, they spent about 97 cents on ads. And then the response was, well, you're not looking hard enough then, are you?
Yeah, so it's the same exact dynamic going on.
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's just again, I just think it strikes the heart of the kind of the moral and intellectual bankruptcy of liberalism, which basically says that everything's great, and if you don't recognize that, then there's something wrong with you.
And we're going to pull out every bit of power that we have, and we're going to use it, and and then we're going to double down and triple down.
Yeah, we're tripling down on disinformation, and now they have, speaking of transatlantic coping mechanisms, they have the Atlantic Council, which connects both the UK and US intelligence elite as well as the others, basically forming their own disinformation study group, I mean, so it's not like the narrative can't fail, it can only be failed. Doesn't matter how much evidence produced that this didn't actually happen. They're just going to keep doubling and tripling down. And now they have a disinformation board at the Department of Homeland Security, another repository, another sinecure for all these propagandists.
Absolutely, and it's just, I mean, it's like Nina Jankovic. I've actually got an article coming on her. She's connected. She is connected, and this is absolutely unbelievable. She sits on the advisory board, and this has barely been publicized. I wonder why. She sits on the advisory board of this British Foreign Office, information warfare operation called Open Information Partnership, which is all run by intelligence people, and it basically serves to state that all Western mainstream media is accurate and true, and anything all independent media is just fake and is probably Russian disinformation and all this other stuff. And it's actually actively works to influence the results of elections in European countries using information warfare. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. And it's I've seen some of her. There was a conservative commentator who did a kind of breakdown. I might send this over to you so you can include it in the show notes or something. It's so funny. There was this conservative who'd like Jankovic she herself had run kind of strategic communications in Eastern Europe, and she was breaking down Nina Jankovic's book, How to Be a Woman on the Internet, and she was just like, this is basically saying if someone criticizes you, they should be banned. And it's like literally, and there's some excerpt in it, and I'm going to have to get the exact quote because it's so funny. It just beggars belief that she committed this to proverbial paper without shame. She said, she states in this chapter, I am definitely not, capitals, a dumb, disfigured, this is Jankovic speaking, I am definitely not a dumb, disfigured CIA operative, deep state bimbo, but more importantly, I am not a bad person. Like
Ugh.
who, like apart from like some 13-year-old in their diary, like thinks that or writes it or thinks it's acceptable. It just, yeah, it's really extraordinary. And I think that the disinformation board is very interesting, because I think that it's a reflection of how actually these elites, that like elite narratives, and indeed the kind of, even with the massive restrictions on social media of like share or I mean, I'm effectively banned on there. Like some people visit my profile and say that they're told it doesn't exist. The amount of censorship online is unreal, and the mainstream media always moves in lockstep on like every conceivable issue. But then if you look at polls, something like 53% of Americans don't care if Ukraine wins. All of that blanket coverage, and all of this self-righteous humanitarian rhetoric about how the Ukrainians are putting up this brave battle for civilization, and it's just like people don't care. But so I think that when all of their past efforts have failed. So yes, creating a kind of agency within the DHS, which is an absolutely shocking record of attacks on civil society and all sorts of other things. We will probably be seeing, by government decree, oh yes, the grey zone is, there'll be, warning labels on websites with or something equally horrible, just like, oh, the grey zone is fake, you can't trust them, WikiLeaks is fake, like it's fake news, it's Russia, it's
all
Russian
propaganda. And also it's funny because the disinformation people the disinformation people are putting out disinformation. Like, it's funny,
Yes.
One of the people who got a job there is out here saying like Azov battalion does not have any neo-Nazi connections, this is Russian propaganda. And for now, she's getting pilloried in the replies because they're simply showing pictures of the Black Sun, which unfortunately is part of this guy who just shot up Buffalo or whatever. And so for now, but guess what? If they get what they want, she'll put ridiculous statements. These disinformation experts, I guess they're experts at promoting disinformation.
Yeah,
they're going to put out their issue, and there's going to be anyone who says anything is going to get banned. So they're just going to let that narrative stand.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's just, I mean, I think it speaks to this kind of desperation. It's just like, when you actually break it down, like so many kind of organizations that individuals that get routinely cited as experts in the media, they're absolute charlatans. It's like, with Bellingcat, which is run by this guy called Elliot Higgins, he's a nasty piece of work. He he can't even, he never went to college. He doesn't have any qualifications. They talk up his investigative brilliance in the media on the basis that he's very good at video games. And there's this organization called, I think it's called the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is this guy in the UK who runs a shop that sells dresses. It almost sounds like it can't be real, but just like he sells dresses and then knows a couple of people in Syria, and then he talks to them on the phone and kind of then on the basis of what they say creates casualty estimates for the Syrian war, which then gets cited in the UN.
Yeah, it gets cited all through the media, and it has for years.
Yeah, that has no credibility whatsoever. He's just some absolute nobody. But then, if you were serving the elite's interest, then you will win awards. You will. I mean, he's received vast amounts of funding from the UK Foreign Office, and it's just like it's quite extraordinary. Just that the hucksters and morons. I saw Nina Jay. I think it was a Senate hearing or something. I can't recall, but she was kind of wittering on about the threat of gendered disinformation and all this other kind of wokery buzzword stuff. Like, it was really and it was just like she was getting like raw. Always like Frances Haugen, who goes in front of lawmakers the world over and talks about what a danger it is that people might see a meme that has misleading information on it on social media. And she's like regarded as this kind of courageous hero. Like,
well, we had a similar kid. I don't know if you remember this story, because this was early, since you mentioned Syria. We had a kind of Higgins here. Her name was Elizabeth O'Baggy. She was with one of the Neocon Institutes, or the Institute for the Study of War, which is connected to the Kagan family. Of course, Kagan is married to Victoria Nuland. This is his brother, Fred, and Kimberly Kagan's think tank cutout, whatever. called the Institute of Study of War. And this Elizabeth O'Baggy was coming out with all these figures, and she was claiming all these things about how the Syrians were moderate rebels and they could win. And the only thing that brought her down wasn't that she was completely fabricating everything. It's that she had lied about her PhD. She didn't actually have a PhD.
Oh.
And that was what brought her down. But if you look at the Elizabeth O'Baggy story, it's very much like, all these sort of old Cold War relic people going, look, the young people use computers. And they're like, oh, here's a young woman. She's born in, I think, 1987 is what I'm seeing here.
Yeah.
And, it's like Higgins, he knows how to use the internet. It's not your old guys' Cold War propaganda. It's the new Cold War propaganda. So there's kind of this, maybe a young people can sort of put a new varnish, new paint job on the old.
Oh yeah. And it's just, but again, it is very much, very, very clearly, based on these these leaked emails, that these people are just completely out to see if it comes to any matters related.
And they put it in email. Doesn't that surprise you a little bit? That's when I'm reading your story. I'm like, wow, these guys just wrote this explicitly in an email. Did they never think?
Yeah, but it just, that's the thing, is that, not that I have anything to hide, although I would say that, but I'm careful about what I say on anything, whether it's in Signal or Telegram, which are allegedly, unbreakable, because, one way or another, like I said, one way or another, the powerful intelligence agencies I think the CIA and NSA combined budget is 85 billion annually. Alone, if you think that these people don't have access to the finest hacking minds and the finest hacking technology in the world, you're a fool.
They don't they need to have hacking. They have the Silicon Valley's in their back pocket. Silicon Valley is an extension of the military industrial complex. In-Q-Tel.
Yes.
Oracle, these are all CIA. Oracle is literally named after a CIA data running program, like Silicon Valley.
But it's like Yasha Levine, who wrote an excellent book called Surveillance Valley, which is, it's really devastating, because I think people really still don't really understand this, that the internet, it does have many, marvelous qualities, but ultimately it was designed as, and continues to serve as, a weapon. And there's that cliche which can't be repeated enough. If a service is free, you are the product.
Yeah, exactly.
So
let me bring up a couple other examples real quick of lack of credibility, and then try to get us back on track on Kit's article. But the Nina Jankovic thing is really important, but she's starting right out with no credibility with her Mary Poppins. And she has a new name now, Scary Poppins. That's her new
Christ, that video
nickname.
is the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. And just yesterday, Barry McCaffrey is a retired general, and Max Boot, who is a supposed military historian, and he's a columnist at the Washington Post. He is also a Council of Foreign Relations fellow. Barry McCaffrey tweeted out a video game footage yesterday of the Ukraine missile defense shooting down.
That was labeled video game, by the way. It had a hashtag.
It had a hashtag in there, Arma. Right. Brilliant. So, and Max Boot retweeted it. And of course, we were like, oh my God, look at this, hurry up before he deletes it. He did delete it.
So the video game footage was Ukraine shooting down Russian planes.
Yeah. In a desert. So anyway, just to add, pile on there on the lack of credibility of the people. But one thing I have to say, Kit, and after the whole Cadwallader thing, and they had a podcast and everything, one of the maybe unintentional beneficiaries of this leak, that it was really MI6 behind this operation, the Russians would be happy about this, I think. Not that it's going to clear their name. Their name can never be cleared in the US or the UK, but they were being blamed for this, and this kind of contradicts that. So. But but like you say, I just think that at this stage they are unexoneratable, to coin a phrase. I think we're seeing it as well with like
this is a slightly separate point, but I mean, something I found really striking is just that it's a bunch of idiots on the internet, but like, I mean, the response of people on social media to, I mean, it's getting increasing. It's gotten to the point now where the Western media can't keep lying and claiming that this is this grand success for the Ukraine, and that actually that they're getting pummeled, and that this is an absolutely desperate situation for them. You know, you see that when the New York Times say, like, publishes an article, referring to, Russia's latest seizure of territory, or indeed, Ukraine's kind of a Ukraine military unit getting routed. A large proportion of the responses are people saying, but how could this be true? Ukraine is winning. Or like accusing them of peddling Russian propaganda. Again, it's just like we've kind of that elite mindset where it's just like, well, we're just gonna if there's no evidence for it, then we're just gonna keep looking until we find someone who claims that there is.
Well, what the Bellingcat guy said, Russia was going to collapse within 3 weeks, right?
Yes.
The Bellingcat analyst, and I think I guess the logic of some of these people is they're doing it. It's good disinformation because we're doing it on behalf of Ukraine, who is a victim. But they don't seem to understand that, well, that kills a lot of your credibility when you say they're going to collapse within 3 weeks and it's still, so it does. I guess they think if they control the mechanism enough, it doesn't matter how much credibility they lose. Is that the logic?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think they just I mean, in the months leading up to this, like the sheer amount of, yes, the Atlantic Council, there was that, I forget the specifics of what she said, but this was in kind of like in mid-January. She was like, over the weekend, Putin's going to invade. They're going to take Kiev. They're going to slaughter like all of these mayors and elected politicians, and they're going to, install all of the, these kind of puppets as leaders. And then, her mea culpa when this just ludicrous thing didn't happen was, I should have been more cautious, and I have learned lessons from this. But there's no sign of it whatsoever. And it's like I think that there's a large number of people who are going to be extremely embarrassed, but when actually, I mean, it seems fairly inevitable at this point that there will be some kind of negotiated settlement, which by and large, with terms by and large dictated by Russia. Although I might be wrong, but I think there's a large number of people who are going to be embarrassed and also bewildered when this all comes to an end. And I don't think it's going to hurt their careers at all, at all. I mean, if you think about the large number of journalists who published outright lies in the lead up to the Iraq War, who have continued to have very lucrative careers. Rachel Maddow, who day in, day out, was talking about the wars closing in and how Russia collusion was going to be proven.
Trump was going to be arrested, right? Mueller was going to arrest Trump, and Mueller's going to have a report. It's going to end this presidency.
Is it the same grifters crop up in this? It's like Malcolm Nance, who's now for whatever reason in Ukraine.
You're right.
Just really, really hilarious. He was a huge kind of resistant / kind of Mueller time activist during the Russiagate stuff. And then on the date that on the morning that the report was going to be released, he was all over the networks, on the kind of CNN, all these kind of basically intelligence fronts, CIA broadcasters, where it's saying this is it, Mueller's got all his ducks in a row, the entire Trump family's going to be indicted, treason, all this other stuff. And then he drops this kind of absolute nothing burger of a report, and then and then Nance is on Maddow's show saying, I don't care what's in it, we're going to keep going after this.
Right, and Dear Love's equivalent, which is John Brennan,
yes,
face planted hard by saying Trump was going to be indicted, and then he had to come on to MSNBC. He was so outlandish, so unequivocal, that he actually finally, one of them had to walk it back and say, "Oh, I got bad information."
Oh yeah,
I mean, disinformation.
No, it's just bad. There's a very different thing. But
let me try to bring us back to your article, Kit, because we want to leave a little extra time at the end for a bonus question. So do you want to just continue maybe talking about some of the things, maybe some highlights or whatever, whatever you want to talk about
Oh yeah,
in the
sure,
article, because there's a lot of good stuff in here. Some of
Yeah.
it's almost hilarious. The Gwynthian, or however you pronounce that
Gwyddian,
name. Yeah, like
well, I
the
mean,
way they write and stuff. It's just
he is a very, very bizarre character. I mean, in one email, he was talking about how he self-identified as his horse. It's just very, I don't really want to know much more about that. But I mean, essentially, yeah. So it's like, I mean, I think I mentioned her, but this is a key. I mean, this is a key thing. So, they had this. They had this mole in the civil service who was like kind of just leaking information like a sieve, and had been and quite what she was doing behind the scenes to sabotage the process, we don't know. Although, yes, as I said, that the cabal in subsequent emails referred to her as vital to our eventual success. So I mean, they clearly perceive her to have been the decisive wrecking ball which took down May as a leader, and indeed got the UK out of the European Union. I mean, I think as well that the one thing that really jumps out is again the influence of Dearlove on government policy to this day, and just his he refers to how he was preoccupied, quote unquote, with briefing Boris Johnson on national security matters. And it's like you've got to bear in mind that this is, again, it's how power works, and you have to be a very specific type of person. And it's the same in the US. To get to the top, you have to be a very specific type of person. Vested interests and shadowy actors like the cabal have to like you, and they have to they think that they have to think they're going to get a return on their investment, that they're going to be able to easily manipulate, or they wouldn't use that phrase probably, manipulate you and influence you, and effectively get you to run the government in their own interest. Precisely. And again, no one actually knows about any of this, and it's just like, if you think about people don't people don't talk about enough how Biden was effectively, and this was actually known when he was on the campaign trail, was literally saying to all of his big ticket donors, again, we have the kind of kind of split between liberal capital and kind of more conservative capital, so talking about how I'm not actually going to do any of this stuff. Like, he was open, I mean, as good as saying it openly to to big ticket donors, that you don't have to worry. I'm not going to, cancel student debt. I'm not going to I mean, then at the same time, you have, the squad saying, well, the second he gets in, we're going to give him hell, and we're going to do all of this. So, put aside your grievances and vote for him. And then, lo and behold, he doesn't actually do anything of what he was saying. So it's just, those are the people who actually truly hold power. I mean, it's like, yes, the swamp, those are the people who truly hold power in, quote unquote, liberal democracies such as the US and Britain. These people who no one will have ever heard of, who have direct lines to government ministers and officials, who can try quite easily put information true or false in their ear in the hope that something happens. And I mean, I think as well, it's just again, it's that kind of House of Cards thing about how cutthroat this all is. It's just like, there was a minister called Michael Gove who was in direct contact with Gwyddian Prince, a ridiculous name, but and was effectively being fed material and being having kind of policy directly dictated to him by these this spectral group, and he failed to give their civil service mole a job. And so now suddenly they're throwing him under the bus. They're talking about, quote unquote, making him pay, blah blah, putting damaging information about him into the public sphere. And it's just like, can you imagine just having? And I'm sure that the politicians were aware this is happening. So it's just like you've got to think that whether you're on the kind of inside or outside, or the kind of your public or private facing, it must be the most miserable existence imaginable, just constantly worrying about who's going to come after you, and also just how you see everything, just basic interaction in in a cafe or something, like you just like with a waiter, you'd be worrying, is this person trying to screw me? Like, are they out to get me somehow? Like, what, they're trying to dig up dirt on me or something? It just, it's just, I think it's just very sad, really.
Which combines with their natural kind of class or status anxiety, right? It's kind of perfect when you look at one of the things this piece points out that I think a lot of people who follow politics in the United States will see a parallel is there's like a clear chain. There's the billionaires, the money, then there's the senior operatives, and then there's all these people auditioning to be useful to the senior operatives to get towards the billionaires. It's kind of this clear, almost neo-feudal patronage system based on doing dirty tricks for a certain faction of the elite. It really is kind of grotesque when you see it all laid out so clearly.
Yeah, and it's just, and this is what I mean, is that like one of the one of the responses I have received to the article is some people saying, oh well, is it that surprising? Is it truly shocking to you? Is this not just how power works? And the response is, well, yeah, but like people like me spend a lot of time saying this and no one listens. Like people like us, like when we talk about these kind of networks and like all of these the kind of vested interests and this kind of and a kind of deep state, and it's just like, but people don't listen. And it's like, funnily enough, I actually know someone who worked in one of the civil service branches that was targeted by this kind of mob. And he was very much someone who, despite working in government, would be like, oh, conspiracies can't happen. The system isn't corrupt, blah blah blah. I've sent this to him, he has not responded. But it's just like, this is a very clear example, and it's this is just a group of like 5-6 people. Bear in mind that like the political lobbying is a vast and very, very profitable industry, both in Britain and America. Like, how many other people do you think are trying to get in politicians' ears, or carrying out kind of diabolical schemes? And it all just seems very very, very, very mundane to them. It's just like, oh right, well, I'm some nameless financier, like based in a tax haven. I'm just going to call up a former MI6 chief and ask them to like try and infiltrate and spy on like in the machinery of government. Oh, okay, then I'll just get some ex-CIA people to do it. It's just like, oh, okay, then, like, it's just not the kind of a thing that the average person would ever think to do or want to do. Like, it's just
or have the ability to do. I mean, it's clearly this is who's got the cash, right?
The psychopathy is really something else.
I have to say also that I would say that it is illustrative of the process itself that many people may be in denial about, although I don't know at this point in history, capital H, how you can really be in denial given the open corruption we've seen. Remember, the US actually has we legalized bribery. That's what Citizens United is, and it's certainly what we took down some of the honest services fraud thing. And Jeffrey Skilling of Enron was behind that, which is a case for him. So anybody wants to explore that and tear their house, go ahead. But I want to say this. I was actually substantively surprised because Brexit has been framed, at least in the media, the liberal media, at least, as the Remainers are the cool-headed, educated classes, and Brexit was revenge of the unwashed, racist, bigoted masses who don't like immigrants, blah, blah. Basically what Hillary Clinton said about Trump voters. They're deplorable. The Brexit was deplorables. But in this case, what your story exposes is a much more complicated picture. Yes, it shows the process of power, but it also shows that actually that dichotomy, that sort of, I guess, Manichaean in the liberal cosmology of the educated good people versus the bigoted, poor, bad people, actually, there are factions in the elite who are for Brexit strongly to the point where they're engaging these sort of dirty trick campaigns. So I would think that would be substantially revealing to some people who weren't quite sure what the dynamics were, because that's how it was represented. It was just like Trump versus, in the deplorables versus the educated good people. Brexit had similar parallels, didn't it, in the way the media presented it?
No, precisely. And it's just like, and I just think that it's just, I think it's just this complete failure by liberals to take the issues that actually matter to people seriously. It's just like, if you look at if you look at polls in both, Britain and America, consistently, overwhelmingly people have thought that the country's going in the wrong direction. They don't like this. They're concerned about this. This is getting worse, and they're just not listened to. And often the response is, is just, oh, well, let's just pile on the wokery. Like, let's get a female head of the CIA, and like we can say that this is progress, or
yes, exactly, the way they throw women out in front of things. I think that's going to fix
or
everything.
like,
that's one of my big pet peeves.
We have our first trans CIA operative, like +1 for human civilization. It's just it's just, I mean, and I think as well that it is so easy from these these people occupy ivory towers, and it's like, yes, that we see this with this kind of right-wing cabal. They are all I would imagine very wealthy. They live on extensive farms, like, or stately homes, and like in the UK, they're so detached, and it's just like, and I think that this should be of interest to people who voted Brexit for like what they consider to be legitimate reasons. It's like, hey, like this has been hijacked. Something, what you saw and believed you would get is not what you're being allowed to have. And it's like there are prospective benefits of leaving the EU, which have not been explored or engaged, because on the one hand you have the kind of liberal elite who are saying that, oh well, there can be nothing good of this, and it's just purely racist, and it's just this xenophobic kind of dinosaur howl. And then on the other, you have these people who are like, oh right, well, we'll just use this kind of upsurge and kind of radical fervor on the part of people in order to, further our own military and intelligence interests.
And isn't there also a kind of a break within the elite to going past the intelligence and different factions there, to say that, there's a certain part of the elite in the UK, just like in the United States, I'm sure, who are like regional elite, who are like, wait a minute, we don't want to make it, we're local capitalist powers. We don't want to surrender that to a more international capitalist. But like, it's like a fighting within the territory. Like, wait a minute, no, we own the UK. We don't want someone else to own it. That you definitely get that sense. Like, if you look at Trump's supporters, it's actually not poor working class people. I'm sure some voted out of frustration. Actually, Michael Moore, one of the few things he said that I really always agree with, he said the Midwest were the Brexit states. They're going to vote. They're just going to go to the polls and vote against the Democrats because they're so pissed off about deindustrialization. But there's also a faction of the Trump elite, who were, local capital owners who didn't like multinational corporations because they see they're in competition with them.
Yeah, precisely. And it's just like, I think that as well, it's just that, I mean, it's an incredible thing, isn't it? That like, all of these all of these kind of anti-establishment figures like Farage, or Trump's a very obvious example. They came from very, very, very wealthy backgrounds, and have a lot of funds available to them. But they managed to convince people that they were outsiders. I mean, I think that in Trump's case, actually, because of his quite genuine contempt for the deep state. I think that he was an outsider in that regard, and yes, very much considered dangerous by by entrenched power. But fundamentally, this was a bunch of wealthy, wealthy elite figures who effectively weaponize the public as their kind of ground troops. It's like, right, well, we're going to get you to vote for Brexit, and we're going to promise you this, and this. But then actually, underneath it all, we have this agenda, which we couldn't say, but they couldn't come out in public and say, the average person is not going to care. They're like, oh, well, the Five Eyes is going to be undermined by this. I think the response of a lot of people who actually know about the Five Eyes would be like, good.
Yes.
And then it's just like, but then you can't say that. So you have to say, oh yeah, well, this is going to create jobs. This is going to, and there was a large number of people who voted Trump because they lived in, kind of, well, I think the derogatory term is like Rust Belt, or like, and also because of his, anti-war messaging. There was a large number of, I think it was, there was the majority of states that voted for him had like the largest number of, kind of military veterans. and stuff. And so it's like, yeah, I think it's very, very, very important to, just more generally not place your faith in, a particular candidate or party to deliver. If you have issues, see whether there's something that you can do via organising or, kind of grassroots manner to resolve them, rather than, placing all your eggs in the basket of an elected politician who it's extremely likely, as we've discussed, will not be in that position if they posed any threat to the system in the first place.
All right. So in the interest of time, first of all, I really wish we had more time to talk, because
it's been great.
There's so much commonality. There's a common thread that goes through this and the previous conversations we've had with you, Kit. And I urge people to not only read this article, there's all kinds of clips in here, that are part of the dump. And also, go back and listen to the conversations about Integrity Initiative, and also continue to follow Kit's work. He's really onto something, and in a way that not only, do we, I guess one of the only things we really can do is grassroots type efforts, but also to expose what you can and help people understand, who's pulling the strings in the background and why. As Dan said, this story shows us how complex the Brexit issue was. And I think a lot of Americans will see that commonality, or they'll at least be able to relate to it based on things that came here. But if we can, let's roll into the bonus question. And this is actually, I'm going to ask a very basic question, but I don't know any of the answer to this, because Kit is kind enough to let us in on a story that he is writing about now. And it also is related to Julian Assange, which is a particularly important topic. This Julian, is set to be extradited to the United States. And basically the only thing that can stop that is some action by Priti Patel. And so Kit is going to tell us about the connection between this story, the very British coup, and Brexit and Boris Johnson, the connections between Dear Love and Prinz, the characters in this story, with Priti Patel, and how they're all related. I know that I kind of maybe botched that, Kit, but if you could.
No. It's very. I mean, it's very on the money. But it's just in terms of. So essentially, yes, we've been talking about Gwydion Prinz and Richard Dearlove, who seem to be the kind of the leaders and puppet masters of this shadowy, largely anonymous group. So one thing that's really striking from and this is very recent. This is in February this year. We stumbled across, January, my mistake, that we stumbled across, there's an email that Prinz sent to Dearlove, and they're outlining the terms of Dark Ullen, dark and then ULLEN, which was the code word title of their quote unquote China project. And this is in Prinz, again, just amazingly candid here, said it will be conducted on the same broad principles and methods as an SIS, that's MI6, research and influence operation. And so this was, it seems that the purpose of this is to attack individuals who are involved in kind of pro-green energy, pro-environmental figures, because he believes them to be, Chinese government agents of influence. But what's really striking is that Prinz, subsequent to this, met with Priti Patel and discussed with her the terms of Dark Ullen, and also subsequent to this, asked her kind of top aide to create a Proton Mail email address for her so they could discuss things securely. What's really, it's really quite extraordinary. This effort, Dark Ullen, they were a couple of years prior. These characters are talking about setting up their own kind of secret, intelligence agency, as it were, kind of or a unit. and they talk about getting funding from Dearlove's successor. Now, this could be a reference to John Scarlett, who, yes, succeeded Dearlove as the head of MI6, or it could be, another subsequent MI6 director. I mean, whether this means that this Dark Island effort is being funded by, directly by MI6 again as a kind of arm's length operation, I don't know. I think that would be, to suggest that's the case would be going, beyond the evidence a bit, and I don't like doing that. But it's just like, so you have this absolutely extraordinary situation where Priti Patel, who's already tied to the Henry Jackson Society, which is a neocon think tank, which has invited several CIA directors to speak at its premises over the years. It's very odd, and it's just like, the Priti is in very close quarters with a research and influence operation being run by shadowy actors and in receipt of kind of dark money funding. And then she is, ruling on whether an individual who was subject to a kidnap and murder plot by the CIA, in which MI6 were, and indeed their beloved Five Eyes was heavily implicated. How she is in any way suitable to make that ruling is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, I think that we are hoping not just purely for the for clicks and views, but we really, everyone at the Grey Zone is a very passionate supporter and Assange sympathizer,
as we are too.
Yeah, and we are really really hoping. I mean, if the decision is made that to send him, then he can appeal, and with this kind of whole this dreadful grinding farce can continue rumbling on. But I think it's publicizing stuff like this is so vital, because yes, there's been a media blackout on so many things related to Julian Assange. Like, that Yahoo News expose of the kidnap kill plot, it was covered by, I think it was covered by BBC Somalia. Like, it wasn't picked up at all in the UK, and it's this is part of a deliberate strategy to erode public sympathy and ensure that he kind of vanishes from people's minds and people's sympathy, and so people don't the public isn't outraged when he's being thrown to the wolves so brutally as he has been for so long. I mean, whether this will in any way influence the process. I mean, that's that's maybe not necessarily what I'm expecting or hoping for, but I mean, at least I think that there needs to be greater public awareness, and again, these people are completely out of control and talk about they want to destroy a dedicated government department in the UK because they don't like the person running it and all this other, and they think that this person's a roadblock to repealing the ban on fracking, and it's just that they're insane, dangerous people who will stop at nothing, and yes, kind of quite clearly view human life as not particularly valuable, and it's it's people like Julian who he's one of the most effective anti-war activists and most well known in the world. He popularized the kind of bulk release of sensitive communications, which is this email tranche quite clearly represents. So I mean, what could be more suspicious than that? I'm not sure whether there are rules in the US against. I mean, I would imagine that most politicians are kind of witting or unwitting CIA assets as it is, but I'm not sure if there is kind of any laws which would mean that that the US Minister of the Interior wouldn't be allowed to be in such close proximity and colluding with a member of an intelligence agency like that.
I don't think there is, and I don't think that there is even a requirement to reveal if you were a former agent of some sort or officer of some sort, which I've always thought was a big problem. There was 2018 election, there were people who did some investigation on a whole large crop of Democrats who ran for Congress, who had, I guess the ones who were reported actually had publicly known ties to intelligence, military intelligence, and such. Like a very large crop of them. Yeah.
Because after Russiagate, there was like a halo effect, they thought. They're like, I'm a former CIA officer protecting our country. They actually made it a campaign point. But yeah, there's a lot of others who it's like, oh, I was in an embassy studying agriculture overseas. And you're like, what?
Yeah, right.
Oh yeah, so AOC, AOC is like a very obvious, very obvious example of this, where like, she just so happens to be working for this very blatant CIA front group in Africa, and then the country like has a coup like a couple of months after she leaves it, and all this other stuff. Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote
about school too. I mean, that's ground zero for CIA recruitment.
Oh yeah. And it's just extraordinary, isn't it? And I actually wrote about this at the time. That like this was back in, I think it was 2017. It might have been 2018. But it was midterms, and the Democrats were running an enormous number of candidates who had like CIA or military experience, and there was like someone who worked for the NSA who like quite literally said on their website, the experience taught me the value of listening, which was just like so tasteless, and like and like and tone deaf. But then like the AOC then started donated significant amount of money to these people, and out of her own kind of campaign coffers. But what's hilarious is that quite a few of them, because they view her as so toxic, rejected the funds or sent them back. And it's just again, you kind of see this kind of split in the elite, where it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, actually we're all kind of pushing in the same direction, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and have the same kind of dark sinister connections to the deep state. But actually, like we kind of bicker over messaging and like kind of defunding the police and stuff. Which
looks like careerism, right, Kit? I mean, it looks like one faction is using woke politics or other issues to careerly advance them. It's not like they're sincere about it. It's kind of like, okay, we can oust some of these guys by using a sort of different. I don't see it as actually like sincere disagreement. I see it as what's that, politics, strife of interest masquerading as contest of principles, Samuel Johnson or whatever. Like, it's clearly like a certain faction is using this as a career move. At least that's what it seems to me. I don't know. What do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And this is the thing as well. Is it's just like again, going back to like the pioneering works of the work of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. Like I think that people are now they're getting increasingly they have there is a growing cynicism about the system, and there is a kind of growing. I like to think that there's a kind of growing questioning of how, power actually works, and that when you have all of this material that WikiLeaks released, which showed that that the US knew that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were going terribly, pretty much from the off, and just consistently lied about it, like just lied about it. More people are questioning this, and so now it's well understood. It's seemingly well understood that when politicians claim to care about LGBTQ rights and whatnot, again, this is being used as a weapon. Like it's being to divide people, to get what's the word? Get people. I mean, there's that Thomas Pynchon quote, which is that like when people aren't asking the right questions, you don't have to worry about the answers. And like I would think that we're kind of moving towards a kind of at least an informational environment where people actually are asking the right questions. And so then
Assange released one of the things that from the WikiLeaks cable that was so interesting was that CIA release where they said, we're gonna start talking about women's rights to bring more support for the war in Afghanistan. And this is like literally a CIA meeting where they're saying this is going to be our new messaging strategy. So, talk about intersectional imperialism or whatever. Like the war's not going so well. And this is like a red notice or whatever. So this is
where it's just like let's pick up the role of women. And
This
it's like,
pisses me off so much.
yeah. It's just, I mean, there are they did similar things in Syria, and it's like I wrote an article about this where it's like, the obviously this is this Western dirty war in which, people were like, dying horribly. There's this absolutely shocking excerpt, which is just like where they say that, like, well, because of the war, so many young men have been killed that it's left a lot of women as the head of their households, i.e., their husbands and sons have been killed. So we can really talk
Empowering.
about. Big up, like, how, like, kind of feminist and progressive, like, all these jihadists are, by focusing on, like, the role of women in areas occupied by extremists. I mean, it's absolutely just the cynicism and the cynicism and the kind of total lack of shame of these people is just really really quite extraordinary. But I mean, just to pull things back, I mean, I think that the publishing this information is one thing, and its result is very much another. And so I think it very much behooves us to not just share this stuff online, but to try and turn this actionable. So it's like, well, what can I do? What and other than write to my senator, who's probably compromised. Get campaigning, get organizing, because it works. And it's like, I mean, irrespective of your feelings about him as a person, I mean, Chris Smalls is a very clear example of someone who, without seemingly without kind of dubious deep state backing, took on a very large, extremely powerful and extremely wealthy corporation and won. Like, these people are not invincible, and actually, they like these emails demonstrate, they are very dishonest, slimy, and quite weak people who have to hide behind, dirty tricks, manipulation, and lies to bring the public to heel.
And Assange, can we talk about Assange? I have a question, Kit, because I always wondered this. What's your theory on why? At least the mainstream media in the United States, I imagine the UK too, actually I'm sure it's the UK too, have turned on Julian so hard, because all of them are really, if in his quote unquote crime, they're all co-conspirators. They all published information he provided them. And now, is it because they personally don't like him? Because trust me, as petty as that sounds, it's absolutely a reality that these people, if it's some petty nonsense. But I'm amazed. We're now in the process of him being extradited to face a very, prison in the United States is no picnic, unlike other civilized countries. He's being extradited, and they seem to be like the New York Times barely even mentions it. They ran his stories. They ran the video. I mean, they ran the collateral murder video.
Well, it's funny because it's not funny at all. It's just very depressing. But I mean, I wrote this article about 3 years ago, which is based on this bombshell talk by, I forget his name now. It was this Australian documentarian who he followed Julian around around the time of the Afghan I think it was the Afghan war logs were being released, and he demonstrates very, 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 I mean, it's macabre, but essentially Julian got set up. The Guardian and the New York Times effectively, and they were very open about this in private, kind of.
Is that Alex Gibney?
No, it was Mark. I think his name is Mark Davis.
Oh, okay, sorry.
And it's He and essentially, I mean, he quite clearly has a high fondness and respect for Julian, which is not always the case with journalists. But he found that there were Guardian journalists kind of joking behind the scenes about how, oh well, we're not publishing this, Julian is. So their whole purpose in with the New York Times and indeed the Guardian partnering, quote unquote, with Julian, was that they would actually get WikiLeaks to publish it and then say, oh well, we're reporting on it, we're not releasing this stuff, because they were scared about the consequences that might kind of rain down on them in a professional perspective. And so it created this ludicrous situation where they had an agreed publication date, and the New York Times phoned Julian directly to say, can you scoop us, i.e. can you publish first? Yes, so they could then report on it and say, we're just reporters, we're not actually, providing this information to the public. And yeah, they were more than willing to do that and get all the plaudits and the sales and the clicks and the awards. Like I think it speaks to the kind of institutionalized nature of journalism as mainstream journalism and industry. These people are absolutely shameless, happy to exploit whoever and then just throw them under the bus brutally. And it's like, the reporting by 99% of the mainstream media on what is one of the most serious and significant press freedom issues in literal history, it's just been absolutely shocking. There's enormous, the Guardian went to enormous efforts to basically justify, Julian's incarceration, through all sorts of, smears and whatnot. And it's just, again, the fact that these people have gotten away with this, I think, it's up to people like us to not let them get away with it, because, no one, least of all powerful people, is going to hold them to account because they're useful.
It's one of the biggest indicators of how compromised they are too, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, we have was it like Jason Leopold who, there were new, James Risen's admitted it, that during the Iraq war that they were routinely sending their stories to the Pentagon to get signed off on and that sort of thing. And it's just, it's remarkable that you would see that as, normal. And it's like, and again, this is what's so extraordinary, is that I'm willing to bet that that there are a large number of journalists who get kind of off record briefings or kind of get past intel or black propaganda directly or indirectly by intelligence services, who, if they had if they had evidence, false or not, that Priti Patel was collaborating with the Russians, or that was emailing via Proton, people connected to the GRU or the FSB or the SVR, that that would be an absolute national scandal. It'd be on the front page of every newspaper. Here we have incontrovertible evidence that the British Home Secretary is in extremely close quarters with a shadowy bunch of intelligence operatives who take credit for having taken down a government. And I absolutely guarantee you that no mainstream publication is going to go near this. So again, it's up to people like us to get this out there and do something about it.
That is really, really depressing. You got to hope that there's some other faction that blocks them or whatever. I mean, I don't even know what you do in that kind of case other than what you're saying. Just talk about what you've learned and expose what you can. But anyway. I don't want to leave it on such a depressing note.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's the thing is, I don't necessarily see it as depressing. I mean, it's like, I think about Julian every day, and it often greatly upsets me. I think that when the extradition order was signed off by the court in London, I mean, that hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was in tears. Happy to admit that. I mean, it was just it was. But that's the thing, is that, again, they come after us because we are strong. So if there's a positive message, it's let's band together. I mean, okay, so let's look at Brexit, or indeed the election of Trump. This were all of the kind of mainstream money, proverbially, and in reality, was on Clinton or Remain winning, and it didn't. This was quite literally an example of people power. And it's because that set such a dangerous precedent that on both sides of the Atlantic, that there's been such an enormous effort to, discredit and malign and, invalidate these results. I mean, we do have it within our power, but it requires mass collaboration, mass organization. But we can do it. And also as well, like, I think we've discussed this before, Jan, but like, we need to people, average people need to move en masse from established, social media platforms and whatnot. Like Twitter is just going to get worse and worse. Like, they'll have like some taint team who's just like rigorously blocking anyone who doesn't.
Right.
But by the end of the year, there was already, there's talk, Jankovic is talking about how like Twitter should have an edit function and people should be able to edit each other's tweets like Wikipedia and whatnot. So you know what? Let's get off these platforms and create our own, or better yet, like meet and organize in person. And then it's you never know what's going to happen. I think that leafleting and putting leaflets through your friends' doors and your neighbors' doors, alerting them to what's happening with his extradition is far more effective than is going to be far more effective than the mainstream media's woeful coverage, or posting a tweet about his plight on Twitter. So yeah, that like we just don't forget that we have the power. We just don't always know it.
And like you mentioned before, that to a certain extent they're weak. I think they're powerful people, but they're so their work and their entire careers have been based on secrecy, and I think that built sort of this reliance on secrecy. And so I think one of the things that they are most motivates them is preventing things from being exposed, and you really only have to scratch the surface.
Oh yeah, well, just kicking the door and the whole rotten structure will go down. I mean, I would imagine as well that when this stuff exposed, there will be an enormous number of people who will disassociate themselves from them and will want nothing to do with them. And it's just like, I mean, if a worker served to even drain 3 or 4 influential people from the swamp, then I mean, I would see that as a major achievement. And I will, view it as as a major achievement for the rest of my life. But there we are. Anyway, thanks so much for having me on.
You have anything else before we wrap up? I'm going to move back into the public part.
No, I think I'm pretty much done.
You got it.
Okay.
Thanks,
all right, Kit. Thank you so much. It's always fascinating and fun to talk with you. And please let everybody know where to find your work. I'm going to link all these things in the show notes, by the way, and how to support you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Now you have a Substack, right?
Yeah, it's just kitklarenberg.substack.com, and you can find me. Yes, you can also find me on Twitter. Or feel free to drop me an email. It's kitklarenberg@protonmail.com. That's out there now. So, is
the Substack the best way to support you?
Yeah, please do. And it's like, it's the best way of keeping up to date with my work. So,
yeah, because he writes for several different things. Again, thank you so much, Kit, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you so much. Bye. Take care, guys. That was great. Cheers.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Kit Klarenberg. Follow him on Twitter @Kit Klarenberg, and follow his work on Substack, and that's where you can support him as well. This is a fully independent podcast. Independent media urgently needs your support right now. You can go to the website aroundtheempire.com to find the ways to support the podcast and get bonus content. Also, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave reviews. Follow on Twitter @AroundTheEmpire. Join us on Telegram, t.me/AroundTheEmpire. And we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Hang in there.